The life of Nikola Tesla wasn't just interesting, it was shocking, or should I say, an electrifying story of the genius who built our modern world. His mind was full of bright ideas that sparked a technological revolution. But where did those sparks actually come from? What if the modern world was born not in a laboratory, but in the dazzling, uncontrollable hallucinations of a single, extraordinary mind? Imagine standing in the pitch-black silence of a 19th century workshop. The air is cold and heavy with the scent of raw copper and machine oil. Suddenly, the darkness is illuminated by a brilliant, blinding flash of insight. This unexpected light reveals the perfect blueprint of a magnificent machine. It is a machine destined to completely change the course of human history forever. Before we step fully into this extraordinary vision, I want to take a quick second to welcome you. If you enjoy stories like this, joining our community by liking and subscribing truly means the world. While you're here, let me know down in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it in your cozy corner of the world? Reading them always makes it feel like we're experiencing this journey together. Settle in, get comfortable, and let your tired mind wander as we begin. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we journey into the brilliant, electric mind of Nikola Tesla. We begin our remarkable story in the stormy mountains of his birth. It was a place where the sky itself seemed to herald his arrival. The story begins far across the dark ocean. It begins in the vast, mountainous expanses of the Austrian Empire. The year was 1856. Nestled deep within a rugged valley lay the quiet village of Smiljan. Today, this peaceful land belongs to modern Croatia. The 10th of July had brought an oppressive heat to the entire region. As evening approached, the sky darkened with a bruising purple hue. The thick smell of fresh pine and wet earth hung heavily in the stagnant air. Nature herself seemed to be holding her breath. Then, as midnight drew near, the silence was shattered. The deafening, rhythmic crash of thunder echoed through the wooden walls of the local parsonage. The storm was fierce and entirely relentless. It tore across the blackened sky with a wild, untamed energy. Inside a small room, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. The faint, warm glow of a solitary candle flickered in the birthing room. It cast long, dancing shadows against the simple wooden walls. In this moment of meteorological fury, a child was born. The roaring thunder completely masked the delicate cries of the newborn infant. The village midwife was terrified by the savage weather outside. She claimed the violent storm was a terribly bad omen. She looked at the infant and called him a child of darkness. But his mother possessed a fierce and unyielding spirit. Her name was Duka. She looked deeply into her newborn son's eyes. She firmly replied, "No," of light. And so, the legend of Nikola Tesla began. His father, Milutin, was a devoted Serbian Orthodox priest. He was a man of profound faith and quiet contemplation. Milutin had a massive library filled with heavy, leather-bound books. He was known for memorizing incredibly long passages of ancient poetry. But it was his mother, Duka, who shaped his brilliant mind. She had absolutely no formal schooling, yet she possessed an astonishing natural talent for engineering. She spent her days inventing ingenious home-craft tools. Duka created brilliant mechanical appliances to make their harsh farm life easier. She worked tirelessly from the cold dawn until the dark dusk. Tesla always credited his own eidetic memory to her pure genetics. His profound creative abilities were a direct inheritance from his unschooled mother. But tragedy soon cast a long shadow over the quiet parsonage. Nikola had an older brother named Dane. Dane was widely considered to be the true golden genius of the family. The parents doted on his incredible intellect, but when Nikola was only 5 years old, disaster struck the family. A terrible horseback riding accident took young Dane's life. The grief that followed was immense and suffocating. A heavy, quiet sadness fell over the household for many years. Nikola felt a constant, crushing pressure to live up to his brother's lost potential. It was a silent weight that would constantly drive him forward. He retreated into his own curious observations of the natural world. One bitter winter, he discovered a quiet magic in his own home. The air was incredibly cold and perfectly dry. Young Nikola was gently petting his beloved childhood cat, Maka. As he stroked the soft fur, something miraculous happened. He felt the tiny, sharp prickle of static electricity. It transferred instantly from the cat's warm fur to the child's cold fingertips. A tiny, glowing spark snapped in the dim twilight. The sudden spark was tiny, but its impact on his mind was monumental. He excitedly asked his father what this invisible magic was. His father smiled and explained that it was electricity. He said it was the exact same force that lived in the violent lightning storms. The young boy looked out at the towering mountains. He quietly wondered if nature itself was just a giant cat waiting to be petted. His relentless curiosity quickly turned into physical creation. He began building strange devices near the rushing village river. He did not build a normal water wheel with wooden paddles. He gathered small, perfectly shaped stones from the cold riverbed. He was fascinated by the smooth, cold texture of the river stones. He painstakingly built a smooth, completely bladeless water wheel. It was an incredibly strange and beautiful device. It spun gracefully, relying purely on the gentle friction of the moving water. This simple boyhood toy was actually a quiet, revolutionary design. It was a subtle, brilliant hint at the massive turbines he would design decades later. His mind was already seeing the invisible flow of energy, but his physical body was frail and prone to sudden illness. As a teenager, a terrible outbreak of cholera swept through the mountain region. Nikola contracted the deadly, terrifying disease. He was entirely bedridden for 9 agonizing, painful months. He hovered delicately on the very edge of death. His father sat by his bedside, desperate and openly weeping. Nikola looked up with hot, feverish eyes. He made one final, desperate plea to his grieving father. He said he might finally recover if his father let him study engineering. His father had desperately wanted his surviving son to become a priest, but in that dark, smelling room, his father promised. He swore he would send him to the best engineering school in the world. Against all medical odds, the terrible fever broke, and Nikola survived. The natural wonders of his childhood soon gave way to a deeply internal phenomenon. His mind began to conjure terrifying and beautiful wonders of its own. From a very early age, he suffered from a strange, overwhelming affliction. Blinding flashes of light would suddenly appear in his field of vision. These were not ordinary, gentle lights. They were intense, frightening, and completely overwhelming. It was a sudden, blinding white light obscuring his physical vision. These terrifying flashes were almost always triggered by strong emotions or new ideas. Sometimes a single spoken word would bring the blinding flash. It was absolutely terrifying for the young boy at first, but he eventually learned to harness this overwhelming sensory overload. To cope with the chaotic flashes, he began creating vast imaginary worlds. He would travel endlessly in the quiet safety of his own mind. He would see massive new cities and meet fascinating new people. These imaginary places were just as real to him as the physical world. This strange coping mechanism evolved into a profound, unparalleled gift. He developed a vast, utterly limitless mental laboratory. He learned to build and run complex machines entirely in his head. It was the vivid, hyper-realistic rendering of brass gears turning silently in an empty mental void. He did not need messy blueprints or heavy physical models. He claimed his mental models were absolutely perfect in every detail. He could start a heavy motor in his mind and let it run for weeks. Then he would return to it in his quiet thoughts. He would carefully inspect the imaginary spinning parts. He claimed he could actually detect the invisible signs of physical wear and tear. Armed with this astonishing mental clarity, he left his quiet village. He traveled to the Imperial Royal Technical College. This prestigious university was located in the bustling city of Graz. The year was 1875. He proudly attended on a special military frontier scholarship. He was fiercely determined to prove his profound worth to his aging father. During his first year, his relentless work ethic was truly frightening. He routinely woke at 3 in the morning to begin reading. He studied continuously until 11 at night, ignoring his need for sleep. He absolutely never missed a single lengthy university lecture. His old professors were completely astounded by his ferocious intellect. He effortlessly passed twice as many difficult exams as were strictly required. But this intense brilliance soon led to a bitter public conflict. It happened during a demonstration with a highly respected teacher named Professor Pochiel. The proud professor was demonstrating a new, imported machine to the silent class. It was a heavy, complicated Graham dynamo. This was a direct current machine that required sparking commutators to function. These crude commutators were completely necessary to reverse the electrical current, but they sparked wildly, snapping and hissing with wasted energy. They were loud, dangerous, and terribly inefficient. Tesla boldly stood up in the quiet, dusty lecture hall. The harsh scratch of chalk on a slate chalkboard stopped abruptly. Tesla loudly insisted that a motor could run perfectly without the sparking commutators. He envisioned a completely new kind of flowing, alternating current. Professor Pochiel was absolutely furious at the public interruption. He mercilessly mocked the young, poor student in front of the entire laughing class. He confidently declared it was an impossible, foolish dream. He called it a ridiculous, perpetual motion scheme that defied basic physics. The brutal humiliation burned deep within Tesla's proud, sensitive heart. The immense pressure of his studies and the public shame became too much. The bitter clash profoundly shook his usually unshakable confidence. He tragically lost his precious, life-sustaining academic scholarship. Without vital funding, his structured life quickly spiraled out of control. He fell deeply into a dark, destructive gambling addiction. He spent his days and nights in the heavy, stifling atmosphere of a smoky 19th-century gambling parlor. The sharp clatter of billiard balls and the soft shuffle of cards replaced his textbooks. He gambled away his tiny allowance and all his tuition money. The crushing stress finally culminated in a severe, terrifying, nervous breakdown. He suffered terribly in the dark, lonely corners of the city. It was the feverish sweat of a young man pacing his room during a nervous collapse. He was deeply ashamed of his total academic failure. He felt he could absolutely never face his strict, loving family again. He suddenly severed all ties with them and vanished. He disappeared entirely into the gritty underworld of the city. His poor family was left in a state of agonizing, unending suspense. They eventually received a dark, terrible rumor from a traveling merchant. The rumor stated that young Nikola had drowned in the cold Mur River. It was the absolute darkest period of his brilliant early life. But how long could a mind like his remain broken? Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself back from the very edge of destruction. He eventually moved to the beautiful, historic city of Prague. He quietly audited advanced philosophy courses at the Grand University there. This was a desperate effort to finally fulfill his father's dying wish. His father had recently passed away, leaving a heavy weight on Nicholas's conscience. The quiet study of deep philosophy slowly helped heal his fractured, exhausted mind. He slowly rebuilt his massive intellect, piece by delicate piece. By his early 20s, his healing brain was a massive sponge for knowledge. He became a brilliant, worldly polyglot. He eventually spoke 8 different complex languages with absolute, perfect fluency. His powerful mind was quietly repairing itself, preparing for the great work ahead. The year was 1881, and Tesla needed a fresh start. He moved to a completely new and vibrant city. He arrived in the bustling streets of Budapest. He was quickly hired to work for the new Budapest Telephone Exchange. He proudly served as their chief electrician, managing complex wiring systems. But his physical constitution was still incredibly fragile and weak. He soon suffered another strange, terrifying physical collapse. His senses became painfully, unbelievably acute, and completely overwhelming. The quiet ticking of a pocket watch 3 rooms away sounded like thunder. It was like the deafening blows of a massive iron hammer. A horse-drawn carriage passing outside felt like a violent, shaking earthquake. He was totally confined to his bed, recovering slowly in a pitch-black room. By 1882, he was finally well enough to venture outside again. He took a slow, careful walk in the beautiful city park. He was accompanied by his loyal, patient friend, Antal Szigeti. It was a perfectly calm and beautiful afternoon in the grand city. They walked under the golden, fading light of a beautiful setting sun. The warm light was reflecting beautifully off the vast expanse of the Danube River. The evening air was cool, crisp, and deeply restorative to his lungs. Tesla was in a rare state of total poetic elevation. He was passionately reciting beautiful poetry aloud as they walked. He possessed the entire, massive text of Goethe's Faust completely in his memory. It was the rhythmic, poetic cadence of reciting German verses aloud in the cool air. He watched the massive sun descending slowly toward the distant horizon. And then, in a fraction of a second, it finally happened. The blinding flash of intense light suddenly returned to his vision. But this time, it was not chaotic or terrifying. It brought the ultimate, perfect revelation he had desperately sought. The grand solution he had chased since the dusty classroom in Graz suddenly materialized. It appeared perfectly in his mind's eye, glowing with absolute, undeniable truth. It was flawlessly elegant and mathematically beautiful. It was the complete blueprint for the alternating current motor. He suddenly understood exactly how to create a rotating magnetic field. He froze completely in his tracks, his eyes wide with pure wonder. He urgently needed to capture the fleeting, invisible vision before it faded. He looked around wildly and quickly found a simple wooden stick. The sharp scrape of a wooden walking stick, etching curved lines into dry dirt, broke the silence. He frantically drew the complex diagram right there in the park dust. This brilliant, sweeping concept entirely eliminated the need for the sparking commutators. The very useless parts he had argued about in grots were now completely obsolete. He had just solved one of the greatest electrical puzzles in all of human history. Armed with this incredible, invisible treasure, his ambitions grew massive. He knew he had to leave the small limits of his current life. He soon secured a prestigious job with the Continental Edison Company. He packed his bags and moved to the vibrant, beautiful city of Paris. In Paris, he quickly gained a truly stellar reputation among the elite engineers. He was widely considered a master troubleshooter of impossible problems. He was famous for easily fixing incredibly complex electrical problems that baffled everyone else. His mind could simply see the invisible, hidden flaws in the dark circuits. His unique skills were in such incredibly high demand that he was sent away. He was dispatched on a highly critical mission to the city of Strasbourg. A massive, heavily flawed lighting installation at a new railway station had completely failed. It had even caused a terrifying, loud explosion in front of the wealthy local dignitaries. It was Tesla's stressful job to quietly repair the entire disastrous system. He spent many long, lonely months away from the comforts of Paris. He meticulously rebuilt the entire massive installation with perfect precision. But while he was isolated in Strasbourg, he was not just fixing old, broken technology. He was secretly building the glowing future of the entire world. Working very late into the quiet night, he secretly built his machine. It was the very first working, physical prototype of an alternating current induction motor. It was the solid, physical manifestation of his glorious vision in the dirt park. The deep, continuous hum of a newly built prototype motor, vibrating on a wooden table, filled his room. It was the literal sound of a brand new era for humanity. It worked absolutely perfectly on the very first try. There were absolutely no dangerous sparks and no wasted energy. It was just a smooth, continuous, and incredibly powerful rotation. His ultimate technical triumph was completely, undeniably absolute. He eventually returned to Paris, expecting a massive hero's welcome and a grand reward. He walked the grand, ornate architecture of late 19th century Parisian streets with a light heart. He had been firmly promised a very large financial bonus for his difficult, dangerous work in Strasbourg. He confidently presented his highly successful results to the wealthy company managers. He politely asked for his rightful, hard-earned financial reward, but they coldly and cruelly refused to pay him a single coin. They passed the blame around and completely denied him the promised money. He felt deeply, profoundly betrayed by the greedy European managers. Realizing his massive ambitions had completely outgrown the small, greedy minds of Europe, he made a choice. He packed his incredibly meager belongings into a single worn bag. He set his bright eyes on the vast, completely unknown horizon of the new world. He was going to risk absolutely everything and sail to America. It was the warm month of June in the year 1884. A young, incredibly tall and painfully thin immigrant stood on the swaying deck of a ship. He was finally arriving in the massive, overwhelming port of New York City. The long journey across the dark ocean had been an absolute, terrifying nightmare. A violent, bloody mutiny had suddenly broken out on board the cramped ship. In the terrifying chaos, absolutely all of his meager physical possessions had been brutally stolen. His saved money, his return tickets, and all his luggage were completely gone. When he finally stepped off the wooden ramp, his pockets were almost entirely empty. He arrived in this massive, loud country with exactly 4 single cents to his name. He had a few handwritten, delicate poems stuffed deep in his coat pocket. He had some complex mathematical calculations written on scrap paper, and he possessed one single, incredibly valuable letter of formal recommendation. This vital letter was written by his former manager back in Paris. A respected man named Charles Batchelor had penned the short note. It was addressed to the absolute most famous inventor in the entire world. It was a letter to Thomas Edison himself. The short letter reportedly contained a very simple, incredibly powerful message. It read, "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Tesla bravely navigated the strange, terrifying new world of the busy docks. The salty, oily smell of New York Harbor heavily mixed with thick, choking smoke. It was the black smoke of thousands of burning coal fires filling the sky. It was a massive, overwhelming assault on his delicate, refined senses. He somehow found his way to the busy Edison Machine Works building. It was located deep down on the gritty, loud, Lower East Side of the sprawling city. He nervously presented himself to the famous Edison and handed over the letter. Edison was highly intrigued by the intense, incredibly serious young European immigrant. He hired the tall, quiet Tesla almost immediately on the spot. Tesla was thrown straight into the absolute fire of the busy workshop. He was immediately tasked with a truly monumental, almost impossible challenge. He had to completely redesign Edison's own precious direct current generators. Edison's famous DC system was the absolute standard, but it was terribly flawed and inefficient. The heavy machines broke down constantly, sparking and requiring endless, expensive maintenance. Tesla was fiercely determined to prove his immense worth to his new hero. He worked truly grueling, absolutely unbelievable hours without complaint. He arrived at 10:30 in the morning and often did not leave until dawn. He practically lived in the chaotic, deafening, clanging noise of the Edison Machine Works floor. He learned to silently endure the horrible, greasy feel of heavy machine parts. They were constantly being disassembled under the dim, flickering, and smelly gaslight. On one famous occasion, the Grand Ocean steamship Oregon completely lost its internal lighting system. It was scheduled to sail, and Edison was completely desperate. Tesla grabbed his tools and rushed to the massive, dark ship. He stayed up all night long in the cramped, incredibly dangerous, and hot engine room. By the early morning, the ship's lights were burning brilliantly once again. Edison was absolutely amazed at the young man's superhuman stamina and pure brilliance. Seeing Tesla's incredible, unmatched work ethic, Edison made a very grand proposition. He casually offered a truly massive sum of money to the poor immigrant. He told Tesla there would be a $50,000 bonus waiting for him. This absolute fortune was his if he could successfully improve the terrible generator designs. This was an absolute, life-changing fortune for the penniless young man. It was enough money for Tesla to finally build his own massive, private laboratory. It was enough to finally build his precious alternating current motor for the world. For many long months, Tesla worked exactly like a man completely possessed by demons. He completely redesigned the massive machines from the ground up. He brilliantly installed new automatic controls and vastly improved their electrical output. He single-handedly saved Edison's growing company a tremendous amount of money. He had perfectly fulfilled his end of the grand bargain without a single flaw. He proudly went to Edison's busy office to present the final perfect designs. He politely and quietly asked for the $50,000 bonus he had been firmly promised. Edison stopped his work and looked at the tall, tired young man. Edison laughed out loud. It was a cold, completely dismissive, and cruel laugh. Edison told him that he simply did not understand their unique American humor. The grand promise of the massive fortune had been nothing but a cruel, practical joke. The bitter betrayal cut the honest Tesla to his absolute deepest core. He was a man of intense, unwavering honor and strict personal principles. Deeply disgusted by the horrible deception, he turned on his heel in silence. He immediately resigned from the Edison Machine Works on that very day. He walked out the heavy wooden door and absolutely never looked back. But foolish pride did not put warm food on his empty table. Tesla suddenly found himself completely adrift in the harsh, cold, and unforgiving city. He desperately tried to find other engineering work to support himself. He passionately tried to pitch his brilliant alternating current motor to wealthy investors, but they simply did not understand his incredibly advanced mathematics. They only wanted to fund simple, highly profitable, and immediate projects like street arc lamps. When he stubbornly refused to abandon his grand vision, they completely abandoned him to the streets. His fragile fortunes plummeted rapidly into the dark gutter. He entered the absolute darkest, most miserable winter of his entire life. It was the terrible, freezing winter of 1886. The brilliant mind that could easily envision the entire future of humanity was reduced to nothing. He was forced to survive by doing brutal, agonizing manual labor in the streets. In fact, the greatest mind of the age was digging in the freezing mud. He took a terrible job digging deep ditches in the frozen streets of New York. He worked grueling 10-hour days in the freezing wet mud for a mere $2 a day. It was a completely humiliating, agonizing, and painful daily existence. He constantly felt the freezing, biting wind of a New York winter against a ditch digger's face. He silently endured the coarse, rough texture of a wooden shovel handle blistering his cold hands. He was constantly starving. He was entirely exhausted. He was absolutely, completely alone in the world. He began to seriously question if his incredible mental visions had all been a terrible, lifelong curse. But how long could a mind like his truly remain buried? A mind that could easily conjure entire, perfect worlds in the dark could not be kept in the mud for long. The brilliant sparks of his mind were simply waiting for the perfect moment. They were waiting to completely ignite the entire world. As Tesla prepares to emerge from the freezing trenches to completely change the world, I would love to know your thoughts. What other brilliant historical minds would you like us to explore in the future? Please leave your wonderful suggestions in the comments below. Let us close our tired eyes now and continue our gentle journey into the electrified era. The freezing, bitter winter of 1886 finally surrendered to a gentle spring. The frozen mud of the New York streets slowly thawed into soft earth, and with this welcome change in the cruel weather, Tesla's fortune finally began to turn. Word of an eccentric, brilliant man digging ditches had slowly spread through the city. It eventually reached the curious ears of two wealthy investors. A telegraph superintendent named Alfred Brown and a prominent lawyer named Charles Peck were highly intrigued. They were actively searching for a truly revolutionary new technology to fund. They managed to locate the tall, exhausted immigrant working in the dirty streets. They carefully listened to his grand, incredibly complex ideas about alternating current. They possessed enough technical understanding to realize he was absolutely a genius. In the glorious spring of 1887, they offered him a lifeline. They officially formed the brand new Tesla Electric Company. They generously provided him with a fully equipped, beautifully pristine laboratory. It was located in the bustling heart of Lower Manhattan. Tesla was finally free from the agonizing, humiliating grip of crushing poverty. He stepped into his beautiful new workspace with tears in his tired eyes. He immediately began to build his magnificent, long-awaited alternating current motors. The glorious gleam of polished brass and copper on his neatly organized laboratory tables was mesmerizing. He worked with a feverish, unstoppable joy, turning his mental visions into heavy physical reality. Within a few incredibly short months, he filed his very first essential patents. These brilliant patents perfectly detailed his entire polyphase alternating current system. The entire scientific community was suddenly buzzing with intense, undeniable excitement. In May of 1888, he was invited to speak to his peers. He delivered a truly landmark, historic lecture to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. The room was absolutely packed with the greatest scientific minds of the entire era. There was a hushed, attentive silence of suited engineers in the grand, wood-paneled lecture hall. Tesla confidently explained his beautiful, elegant, rotating magnetic field to the captivated audience. Far away in the booming industrial city of Pittsburgh, a powerful man was reading. His name was George Westinghouse. He was a wealthy, highly ambitious industrialist who had made his vast fortune in railroad air brakes. The dark, soot-stained skies of industrial Pittsburgh in the 1880s were full of thick progress. Westinghouse was desperately searching for a way to effectively challenge Thomas Edison's direct current monopoly. He read the printed transcript of Tesla's brilliant New York lecture. He instantly recognized that this beautiful, simple system was the exact perfect solution. He immediately traveled all the way to New York City to visit the quiet laboratory. Westinghouse was a physically large, commanding, and incredibly direct man. He walked into the gleaming laboratory and looked at the spinning motors. The firm, heavy handshake between the towering Tesla and the robust George Westinghouse sealed human history. Westinghouse did not hesitate or attempt to cheat the brilliant inventor. He immediately purchased Tesla's entire catalog of alternating current patents. He boldly offered an astonishing $60,000 in hard cash and valuable company stock. Furthermore, he offered an incredibly generous, unprecedented royalty agreement. Tesla would receive $2.50 for every single horsepower of electricity generated. Tesla briefly moved his life to the smoky city of Pittsburgh. He worked directly as a highly paid technical consultant for the growing Westinghouse Electric Company. He helped their engineers adapt his pure designs for massive, heavy industrial production. This incredibly powerful alliance officially sparked the famous War of the Currents. It was a bitter, highly public battle between Edison's direct current and Westinghouse's alternating current. Edison was absolutely furious and deeply threatened by this vastly superior new technology. He stubbornly refused to admit that his beloved direct current was highly flawed. Instead, Edison launched a cruel, deeply terrifying, and ruthless public smear campaign. He desperately wanted to convince the terrified public that alternating current was a deadly menace. He hired men to brutally electrocute innocent stray animals in the public streets. The unsettling, sharp crackle of an electric spark in a dark alleyway during an Edison demonstration terrified crowds. It was a very dark, incredibly ugly chapter in the grand history of science. This terrifying campaign of fear eventually culminated in a truly grim, horrifying invention. Edison's desperate supporters secretly funded the creation of the very first electric chair. They deliberately used a Westinghouse alternating current generator to power the terrible device. They wanted the public to forever associate Tesla's beautiful invention with horrific death. But despite all the terrible bad press and the endless cruel rumors, truth prevailed. The absolute technical superiority of alternating current over incredibly long distances was completely undeniable. Edison's weak, direct current could only travel a few short miles before fading to nothing. Tesla's alternating current could easily travel hundreds of miles with practically zero loss of power. The ultimate deciding battleground for this bitter electrical war would not be fought in the dirty press. It would be fought on the absolute grandest, most spectacular stage the world had ever seen. The year was 1893. The magnificent city of Chicago was preparing for an event of unprecedented, massive global scale. It was the World Columbian Exposition. This massive, sprawling fair was carefully chosen to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus arriving in America. It was intended to absolutely dazzle the entire world with modern wonders. The fair organizers desperately needed a way to illuminate the massive fairgrounds at night. They announced a massive, highly competitive public bidding war for the grand lighting contract. General Electric, which was the newly formed giant company of Thomas Edison, submitted a very large bid. But George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla saw the ultimate, perfect opportunity. They aggressively underbid General Electric by a staggering $40,000. It was an incredibly massive financial risk for the Westinghouse company. But they miraculously won the highly coveted, historic lighting contract. It was destined to become the very first completely all-electric fair in all of human history. The exposition was widely dubbed the White City by the amazed public. It featured massive, beautiful neoclassical buildings, completely covered in stark white plaster. When the dark night finally fell over the vast fairgrounds, President Grover Cleveland pushed a tiny button. Suddenly, over 100,000 glowing incandescent lamps burst into brilliant life. They were all flawlessly powered by Tesla's beautiful alternating current system. The blinding, ethereal glow of thousands of bulbs illuminating grand, white plaster architecture at night was absolutely stunning. The amazed crowds wept openly at the stunning, completely unprecedented visual beauty. Tesla himself had a massive, highly popular personal exhibition space inside the fair. It was a beautiful, dark room filled with strange, spinning metal eggs and weirdly glowing glass tubes. He wanted to personally prove the immense power and absolute safety of his beautiful currents. He proudly demonstrated his famous egg of Columbus to the delighted crowds. It was the smooth, rapid spinning of a heavy copper egg on a simple wooden platform. The invisible, rotating magnetic field caused the heavy egg to mysteriously stand perfectly on its end. The amazed fairgoers completely thought it was dark magic or a hidden trick, but Tesla patiently and calmly explained the beautiful, invisible science of his magnetic fields. To completely counter Edison's terrible claims that alternating current was deadly, Tesla did the unthinkable. He stood calmly on a high platform in front of the nervous, watching crowds. He famously allowed hundreds of thousands of volts of high-frequency electrical current to pass directly through his own physical body. He felt absolutely no pain whatsoever. It was merely the subtle, harmless, tingling sensation of high-frequency current gently passing over the skin. The current harmlessly traveled over his clothes and out through his hands. He calmly held totally unconnected, unpowered, phosphorescent tubes in his bare hands. The violet, ghostly halo of light emanating from a glass tube held in bare hands shocked everyone. The glowing magical tubes lit up brightly with absolutely no physical wires attached. The collective gasp of thousands of awestruck fairgoers echoed through the massive halls. They saw him as a modern wizard, a true master of the invisible lightning. Over the course of the long summer, 27 million curious visitors attended the spectacular fair. They all witnessed the absolute, undeniable triumph of the beautiful alternating current system. They left the bright fairgrounds and traveled back to their dark, quiet homes across the entire country. They carried with them the bright, glowing promise of a completely electrified future. The grand victory at the beautiful fair positioned Westinghouse absolutely perfectly for the next massive challenge. Having successfully lit the gorgeous white city, Tesla's bright eyes turned northward. He looked toward a much greater, completely untamed, and massive force of raw nature. It was a truly terrifying force of water simply waiting to be conquered. For many long decades, brilliant engineers had dreamed of harnessing the awesome, raw power of Niagara Falls. The sheer, overwhelming volume of crashing water contained an unimaginable, absolutely massive amount of kinetic energy. The prestigious International Niagara Commission was officially formed to solve this monumental problem. It was proudly headed by the famous British scientist, Lord Kelvin. The wealthy commission offered a massive cash prize to anyone who could successfully harness the mighty falls. At first, the stubborn Lord Kelvin was actually a very harsh critic of alternating current. He strongly favored Edison's direct current, believing it was the only proven method. But then Lord Kelvin personally visited the spectacular Chicago World's Fair. He saw the flawless, incredibly brilliant performance of Tesla's magnificent system. He completely changed his mind on the very spot and fully endorsed the brilliant Tesla. A highly prominent, wealthy financier named Edward Dean Adams managed the massive project funds. He confidently awarded the historic, massive contract directly to Westinghouse Electric. It was the absolute most ambitious, terrifying engineering project ever attempted in human history. It took 5 agonizing, incredibly difficult, and very dangerous years to build. They slowly constructed the massive, beautiful brick structure known as Powerhouse No. 1. The bone-rattling, deafening roar of millions of gallons of water crashing over the falls was a constant companion. The brave workers carved deep, massive tunnels directly through the solid, ancient rock. They carefully lowered the massive, cold steel of giant turbine blades resting before installation. These incredible turbines would drive the largest electrical generators the world had ever seen. They were beautiful, massive, 5,000 horsepower alternating current generators perfectly designed by Tesla. When the giant machines were finally assembled, they were a glorious sight to behold. Tesla's own name and his specific patent numbers were permanently inscribed on the massive metal plates of the generators. He had truly, absolutely conquered the mighty, rushing river of his early boyhood dreams. On the freezing night of November 16, 1896, they finally opened the heavy water gates. The massive turbines began to slowly turn, whining with an incredible, rising pitch. The deep, resonant vibration of the floorboards as the great generators spun to life was completely intoxicating. Massive, invisible power surged perfectly from the rushing falls to the distant city of Buffalo. It traveled cleanly and flawlessly over 26 miles of cold, frozen countryside. The thick copper wires stretching endlessly into the horizon on tall wooden poles carried the pure future of humanity. The incredible project absolutely proved that massive amounts of electricity could be transmitted economically over massive distances. It was the final, completely decisive victory in the bitter war of the currents. But this glorious, historical triumph came with a very dark, incredibly painful personal cost. During the incredibly long, expensive construction of the massive project, disaster struck the American economy. The terrible financial panic of 1893 absolutely devastated the entire country. Hundreds of massive businesses failed, and the wealthy banks completely stopped lending money. Westinghouse's massive company faced total, complete financial ruin due to the incredible capital required for Niagara. The ruthless, highly powerful banker J.P. Morgan saw a dark opportunity to seize control. Morgan coldly demanded that Westinghouse completely drop Tesla's incredibly generous royalty contract. He said the massive, ongoing royalties would simply bankrupt the entire company. He stubbornly refused to secure further vital funding unless the expensive contract was completely destroyed. George Westinghouse traveled to New York with a very heavy, deeply broken heart. He sadly explained the dire, terrible financial situation to his brilliant friend. Tesla simply looked at the tired, defeated man who had bravely believed in him when nobody else would. In a completely profound, absolutely unbelievable act of personal loyalty, Tesla asked for his paper contract. He held the incredibly valuable document in his long, elegant hands. It was a legal contract that was currently worth millions and would eventually be worth billions. Without a single moment of hesitation or regret, he simply tore it apart. The crisp, clean tear of a valuable paper contract being ripped in two echoed in the quiet room. Tesla literally walked away from unimaginable, massive wealth simply to save his dear friend's company. He told Westinghouse that the beautiful alternating current system was his true gift to the entire world. The money simply did not matter to his vast, glowing mind. With the alternating current victory permanently secured, Tesla gently retreated to his personal sanctuary. He completely shifted his brilliant focus away from thick copper wires and massive iron generators. He began to look very deeply into the mysterious, invisible space existing entirely between them. Tesla established a brand new, highly secretive, and wildly productive laboratory. It was located at 33 to 35 South Fifth Avenue in the bustling heart of New York. This dark, wonderful room quickly became known as the legendary Laboratory of Wonders. Tesla was now a highly famous, deeply celebrated international celebrity. He regularly entertained the absolute elite members of wealthy American society. He hosted brilliant, famous figures like the beloved writer Mark Twain and the great architect Stanford White. He would invite them into his dark laboratory for spectacular, completely exclusive midnight demonstrations. He loved to put on thrilling, magnificent shows of pure electrical magic for his wealthy friends. During this incredibly fertile period, he discovered things that completely defied human imagination. He was experimenting wildly with high vacuum tubes and invisible, high-frequency energy. He noticed strange, invisible rays that could magically pass straight through solid matter. He successfully captured some of the very first incredible X-ray images in history. He beautifully called these strange, glowing pictures his photographs. It was the eerie, greenish glow of a vacuum tube illuminating the skeletal structure of a hand in the dark. He photographed his own bones, completely fascinated by the invisible architecture of the human body. He was exploring completely uncharted, wildly dangerous territories of pure physics. In 1898, he completely stunned the entire world yet again. He rented a massive indoor pool of water inside the famous Madison Square Garden. He boldly promised the huge crowd a demonstration of absolutely impossible, pure magic. He placed a small, beautifully crafted iron boat into the calm water. It had absolutely no wires, no visible oars, and absolutely no human captain. Tesla stood far away on the distant edge of the pool, holding a small wooden box. The silent, smooth gliding of a small iron boat through an indoor pool of water completely shocked the audience. He commanded the boat to stop, to turn left, and to brightly flash its lights. He did all of this completely invisibly, using the very first radio waves ever harnessed. The terrified, confused crowd was so profoundly shocked they completely panicked. They genuinely believed the boat was controlled by dark magic or telepathy. Some even foolishly suggested there was a highly trained, tiny monkey hidden secretly inside the metal hull. Tesla proudly called this magnificent invention a teletomaton. It was the absolute, undeniable birth of remote control and the grand foundation for modern robotics. He had completely invented the wireless future, decades before the rest of the world could even understand it. His brilliant mind simply never stopped searching for the deeply hidden, resonant frequencies of the natural world. He experimented endlessly with the powerful, invisible forces of mechanical resonance. He built a small, highly powerful mechanical oscillator that could vibrate at very specific, incredibly rapid frequencies. He casually clamped this tiny device to a heavy, solid steel support pillar in his laboratory building. He turned the small machine on and gently increased the vibrating frequency. Soon, the rhythmic, heavy thumping of a mechanical oscillator began shaking the brick walls of the entire building. The vibrations magically traveled straight down through the heavy steel pillar and directly into the sandy earth. The vibrations hit the exact resonant frequency of the entire massive city block. Suddenly, a very real, completely terrifying localized earthquake struck the busy neighborhood. Heavy glass windows shattered instantly, thick plaster cracked loudly, and heavy machinery flew off the factory tables. Terrified police officers frantically rushed to his shaking laboratory door. They found Tesla desperately smashing his own brilliant machine to pieces with a heavy iron hammer. He had realized the terrible, massive danger just in time to stop the absolute destruction of the entire street. He calmly told the angry police that he could easily split the entire earth in two with a simple vibration. It was a terrifying, deeply sobering testament to the unbelievable power he now commanded. But the invisible forces of nature can be incredibly cruel and completely unpredictable. In the cold, dark month of March, 1895, an absolute tragedy struck the great inventor. In the dead of the quiet night, a terrible, raging fire broke out in the lower floors of his building. The hungry flames quickly spread upward, completely engulfing his beautiful laboratory in an inferno. The choking, acrid smell of burning insulation and charred paper filled the night air. Tesla rushed to the blazing scene, but he was far too late to save anything. He stood completely helpless on the wet street as his entire, magnificent world simply burned to ash. The devastating fire completely destroyed a literal lifetime of brilliant, unpatented inventions. Absolutely all of his delicate physical models, his irreplaceable glass tubes, and his lifetime of handwritten notes were gone. When the cruel morning sun finally rose, only ruin remained. It was the absolute silence of a devastated genius staring blankly at a pile of gray ash. The immense, crushing weight of the terrible loss completely broke his powerful spirit. Deeply devastated, the great Tesla fell into a very deep, utterly profound depression. He spent many long, silent weeks completely bedridden in his lonely hotel room. He refused to eat, he refused to speak, and he refused to even look at the daylight. He honestly believed his brilliant career was completely, permanently finished. But the burning fire inside his mind was only sleeping. It was never truly extinguished. He eventually found the quiet, stubborn resolve to completely start his life over again. He slowly rose from his dark bed, his eyes burning with a totally renewed, fierce purpose. To perfectly rebuild his magnificent world, he knew he absolutely needed a fresh start. He needed to completely escape the crowded, dirty, and terribly noisy confines of the eastern city. He began seeking a quiet, vast place where the crisp air was thin enough to touch the stars. As we leave the bustling, smoky streets of New York for the quiet frontiers of the Wild West, I invite you to take a deep breath. Let the heavy tension of your long day simply melt away into the soft darkness. If you are deeply enjoying this sweeping journey through human time, simply let your tired body sink deeper into your bed. Allow the gentle, incredibly soothing hum of history to simply carry you forward into sleep. The devastating fire in New York had taken absolutely everything from him. It had ruthlessly consumed his precious physical models, his delicate glass tubes, and his irreplaceable written notes. But his incredibly brilliant mind was far too vast to remain permanently trapped in those cold, gray ashes. He deeply knew that he desperately needed a completely new, vastly different environment to start his monumental work again. He needed a quiet place where the heavy, crowded city air could not stifle his massive, sprawling thoughts. He desperately needed a vast, open landscape where the towering sky itself was close enough to easily touch. In the beautiful, blooming month of May, in the year 1899, he made a grand journey. He traveled far away from the incredibly crowded, noisy, and hopelessly dirty streets of the eastern cities. He completely moved his entire life and his intense focus to the high, majestic altitude of Colorado Springs. The crisp, thin mountain air was absolutely breathtaking and completely, wonderfully transformative. It carried the sharp, deeply refreshing scent of natural ozone directly into his tired, healing lungs. This unique, highly elevated environment was absolutely not chosen by mere accident or casual preference. The incredibly thin, perfectly dry air of the immense mountains was absolutely ideal for his dangerous, highly advanced work. It was the absolute perfect natural laboratory for testing the incredible, invisible wireless transmission of raw electrical energy. He quickly secured a massive, entirely secluded patch of dry prairie land on the quiet outskirts of the small town. He painstakingly built a highly unusual, completely magnificent wooden laboratory that confused all the local townspeople. It was a massive, barn-like wooden structure filled with incredibly strange, highly complex copper machinery. Rising proudly from the very center of this wooden building was a massive, incredibly tall, 80-foot tower. It was a sturdy, deeply impressive wooden tower, reaching desperately upward into the low gray mountain clouds. And extending even further from the very top of that wooden structure was something truly magnificent. It was a staggering 142-foot metal mast poking directly out the roof, reaching for the heavens. It was topped with a massive, gleaming copper sphere designed to capture and direct invisible, unimaginable power. To properly fuel this massive, incredibly hungry mechanical beast, he needed an absolute ocean of raw electricity. Fortunately, the generous managers of the local El Paso Electric Company were deeply fascinated by the famous inventor. They generously provided him with absolutely free, completely limitless power from their busy municipal generating station. With this massive, incredibly vital resource permanently secured, he began to build his absolute greatest masterpiece. Inside the dark, cavernous wooden barn, he constructed a massive, incredibly terrifying device he called the magnifying transmitter. It was the absolute largest, most incredibly powerful Tesla coil ever built by mortal human hands. It was a beautiful, deeply terrifying mountain of gleaming copper coils and incredibly heavy, dark wooden supports. The rough, deeply splintery texture of the wooden floorboards vibrated intensely beneath his heavy, rubber-soled boots. When he finally powered the massive machine on, the results were absolutely, completely terrifying and deeply beautiful. He was successfully generating massive, incredibly bright, artificial lightning bolts entirely inside the wooden building. The blinding, jagged crack of an artificial lightning bolt inside a dark wooden barn was an unbelievable sight. He bravely sat calmly on a simple wooden chair, completely surrounded by a terrifying storm of his own perfect creation. These were not tiny, harmless sparks of delicate static electricity. These were massive, incredibly violent, and totally destructive bolts of raw, uncontained power. Some of these beautiful, terrifying, artificial lightning bolts reached an astonishing 135 feet long. They ripped fiercely through the thin mountain air, desperately seeking the grounded earth with a terrifying, primal fury. The sheer, absolute raw power of these magnificent electrical discharges was completely unprecedented in all of human history. The resulting thunder from these massive bolts was incredibly loud, completely deafening, and deeply bone-rattling. The thunder from these bolts was clearly heard by terrified people in quiet towns 15 miles away. The heavy, resonant silence of the prairie instantly following a deafening thunderclap was deeply eerie and profound. The incredibly powerful, invisible electrical field entirely surrounded the vast, empty prairie outside his wooden laboratory. Strange, deeply unnatural phenomena began to regularly occur in the quiet fields surrounding his massive tower. Tiny, glowing sparks danced wildly and beautifully along the dry, dusty ground under the dark night sky. Local horses shied away in total terror from the sudden, sharp shocks of their own electrified metal horseshoes. Even the delicate, completely fragile insects of the high mountain air were profoundly, magically affected by his work. Beautiful, delicate butterflies were regularly observed, flying with eerie, soft, ghostly blue halos on their wings. It was the gentle, completely harmless phenomenon of St. Elmo's fire glowing brightly on their delicate, tiny wings. He had literally, completely electrified the entire, vast, natural world perfectly surrounding his quiet mountain retreat. But this immense, entirely uncontained power was incredibly dangerous and completely impossible to perfectly control at first. During one massive, incredibly ambitious nighttime surge, a terrible, totally unexpected disaster completely struck the town. He accidentally pushed his massive, hungry machine entirely too far past its absolute physical breaking point. He drew completely too much raw, flowing current from the generous municipal power grid all at once. He tragically, accidentally overloaded and completely destroyed the entire town's main power station generator in a massive, fiery flash. He plunged the entire, bustling town of Colorado Springs into total, unexpected, and completely terrifying darkness. The quiet townsfolk were absolutely furious, completely stranded in the pitch-black cold of the mountain night. The incredibly embarrassed, deeply apologetic inventor completely paused his grand, world-changing experiments immediately. He spent a full, completely grueling week politely paying for and personally repairing the broken town generator. He worked tirelessly, entirely by hand, to perfectly restore their precious light and regain their fragile trust. But this was only the very beginning of his grand, deeply mysterious mountain adventure. The thunderous, incredibly violent storms of his own creation were magnificent, terrifying, and deeply awe-inspiring. But it was in the quiet, deeply peaceful aftermath of these thundering storms that he truly began to listen. He began to listen incredibly closely to the gentle, entirely invisible whispers of the earth itself. He completely turned his brilliant, deeply sensitive mind away from the loud, cracking lightning. Tesla discovered a profound, incredibly beautiful, and completely hidden secret about our vast, rotating planet. He brilliantly realized that the entire Earth itself could naturally act as a massive, perfectly efficient electrical conductor. He believed the Earth was literally alive with deep, vibrating energy, simply waiting to be perfectly plucked by carefully tracking heavy, naturally violent lightning storms as they moved slowly away from his quiet mountain lab. He saw it, he observed, massive, entirely invisible standing waves of pure electricity vibrating deeply within the solid, rocky earth. These deep, resonant waves completely proved his magnificent, sweeping theory of a highly conductive, vibrating planet. He realized he could literally pump endless, massive power directly into the Earth itself. And this incredible, limitless power could be effortlessly retrieved anywhere else on the entire massive globe. To perfectly prove this beautiful, grand theory, he began to work entirely in the deep, quiet dark. He spent his long, incredibly cold mountain nights in total, absolute, and profoundly deep isolation. He built incredibly delicate, highly sensitive receivers to carefully monitor the vast, sweeping electrical currents of the earth. The absolute, velvety darkness of a prairie night, completely unpolluted by any harsh city lights, surrounded his lonely building. The deep, bitterly cold expanse of the starry sky, viewed through a simple wooden window frame, was his only companion. The profound, deeply solitary feeling of being the absolute only waking soul quietly listening to the universe was intoxicating. He sat perfectly still for many long, completely silent hours in the vast, echoing darkness of his laboratory. He was desperately, endlessly listening to the random, completely chaotic atmospheric static of the noisy, natural world. The faint, perfectly rhythmic ticking of a highly sensitive telegraphic receiver echoing in a totally silent room was mesmerizing. A solitary pool of warm, deeply comforting yellow light from a small desk lamp illuminated his dark space. The beautiful, soft light fell beautifully over his meticulously written scientific notes and complex mathematical equations. Then, on one incredible, entirely unforgettable summer night, absolutely everything in his vast universe changed forever. Through the loud, chaotic, and completely random noise of the natural weather static, he heard something impossible. He clearly detected highly unusual, deeply rhythmic, and completely, perfectly organized electrical signals hitting his delicate receiver. They were distinct, beautifully clear, and completely undeniably intelligent pulses of pure electrical energy. 1, 2, 3. The gentle, completely rhythmic tapping repeated perfectly in the quiet, lonely darkness of his mountain laboratory. They completely did not match regular, chaotic weather, static, or any known, natural, earthly electrical phenomenon. He became absolutely, completely convinced he had miraculously intercepted intelligent, deliberate signals from another distant world. He firmly, passionately believed they were desperately calling out from the distant, mysterious surface of Mars or Venus. The profound, deeply overwhelming sense of cosmic awe completely filled his tired, lonely heart with pure, incredible joy. He honestly believed he was the very first mortal human being to ever hear the voices of the distant stars. He proudly and boldly announced his incredible, mind-bending discovery to the entire, highly skeptical scientific world. But this bold, deeply astonishing claim sadly brought him incredibly severe, profoundly painful public ridicule. The completely closed-minded scientific community mercilessly mocked the great, brilliant inventor as a totally delusional dreamer. In a desperate, completely passionate attempt to defend his deep honor, he wrote a beautiful, sweeping essay. He published an incredibly impassioned, beautiful article titled "Talking with the Planets" to explain his profound sense of awe. He beautifully detailed the profound, deeply spiritual experience of sitting entirely alone in the dark, listening to the cosmos. But his brilliant, rapidly expanding mind quickly moved entirely past the simple idea of distant alien voices. He boldly concluded that absolutely not only could basic, simple communication be totally, globally wireless, but immense, completely limitless industrial power itself could literally be pumped directly into the resonant earth. This beautiful, perfect energy could then be effortlessly retrieved entirely anywhere on the globe without a single copper wire. Armed with this magnificent, totally world-changing knowledge, his time in the quiet mountains was finally complete. In the very dawn of the year 1900, he proudly returned to the bustling, massive city of New York. He carried deeply heavy wooden trunks, completely filled with brilliant, irreplaceable notes and beautiful, complex diagrams. He returned with a massive, entirely unstoppable mind, completely overflowing with a brilliant, totally global vision. He sadly left his magical, deeply mysterious Colorado lab entirely far behind in the lonely, dusty prairie. The beautiful, towering wooden building was eventually, completely, tragically, torn entirely down into cheap scrap wood. It was totally destroyed, simply to rapidly pay his deeply massive, outstanding local financial debts. But the invisible, completely profound secrets he had magically unlocked there would forever change his grand destiny. Armed with the beautiful, entirely profound secrets of the Earth's deep electrical resonance, he set out on his greatest quest. He set out to completely build a massive, towering monument that would invisibly bridge the vast, dark continents. He envisioned a totally wireless world, completely united by an invisible, entirely beautiful web of free, limitless energy. In the early months of 1900, he desperately sought massive, completely unprecedented financial backing for his greatest vision. He successfully, miraculously secured a staggering $150,000 from a highly powerful, deeply intimidating man. This massive, incredibly vital fortune came directly from the incredibly wealthy, deeply ruthless Wall Street financier named J.P. Morgan. Morgan was a man of totally immense, completely unquestioned power and deeply absolute, totally rigid practical business. Morgan strictly, completely intended to exclusively fund a highly profitable, totally secure transatlantic wireless communication system. He wanted to entirely control the lucrative, highly expensive flow of global stock market information across the vast ocean. Tesla eagerly, confidently purchased a large, incredibly beautiful tract of totally empty land in Shoreham, out on Long Island. He proudly, fiercely, and deeply aggressively began constructing his absolute ultimate masterpiece, the legendary facility known as Wardenclyffe. He wanted absolutely nothing but the pure, totally undeniable best for his grand, world-changing global project. He hired the highly celebrated, incredibly famous, and deeply expensive architect Stanford White to perfectly design the main building. The elegant, highly precise, and deeply beautiful red brickwork of Stanford White's quiet laboratory building was a true architectural marvel. It was a place of total, absolute scientific worship, beautifully designed to house the greatest mind of the modern age. But the absolute, undeniable centerpiece of the entire massive, incredibly expensive project was a truly gigantic, towering wooden structure. It was a staggering 187-foot wooden tower reaching desperately into the low, gray ocean clouds. The fresh, sharp, and deeply earthy smell of raw timber completely filled the salty ocean air. The massive, incredibly complex skeletal tower was proudly, painstakingly erected piece by massive, heavy piece. It was beautifully, perfectly topped with an absolutely massive, incredibly heavy 55-ton hemispherical metal dome. The long, gently stretching shadows of an unfinished, magnificent dome cast a beautiful, deeply melancholic silhouette against the setting sun. But the absolute most important, deeply secretive part of the massive structure was entirely hidden far underground, far beneath the towering wooden structure. Incredibly deep, massive, and highly complex shafts were painstakingly dug directly into the earth. The cold, deeply damp air rising continuously from the deep, subterranean iron shafts below the earth carried a profound mystery. These heavy, massive iron roots were perfectly, brilliantly designed to firmly, entirely grip the planet's profound electrical resonance. Secretly, entirely deep within his massive, utterly brilliant mind, Tesla planned to use the beautiful tower for something much greater. He entirely, completely deceived the powerful, wealthy Morgan regarding the true, massive, ultimate purpose of the grand facility. He did not just want to send simple, highly profitable, and totally boring telegraph messages across the vast, dark ocean. He deeply, passionately intended to seamlessly transmit free, totally limitless wireless electricity globally to absolutely every single human being. He wanted to completely power the entire massive globe for absolutely free, entirely ending poverty and bitter human suffering forever. The gentle, incredibly peaceful rustle of Long Island grass bending slowly in the cool ocean breeze surrounded his deeply secret dream. He worked entirely relentlessly, completely pushing his aging, tired body to the absolute, incredibly fragile physical brink of total collapse. But, in the fateful, highly historic year of 1901, a massive, crushing blow completely shattered his grand plans. A young, highly ambitious Italian inventor named Guglielmo Marconi successfully sent a simple transatlantic radio signal across the ocean. Marconi used incredibly simple, highly portable, and vastly, entirely cheaper equipment to miraculously achieve the historic world-changing feat. He did absolutely not need a massive, incredibly expensive wooden tower or deep, completely complex subterranean iron shafts. The incredibly powerful, totally ruthless J.P. Morgan was absolutely, completely furious at Tesla's massive, incredibly expensive deception. Morgan coldly, quickly realized that free, globally transmitted wireless electrical energy could absolutely never be effectively metered or sold. If anyone could simply stick a tiny metal rod into the dirt to receive completely free power, there was absolutely no profit. He ruthlessly, entirely, and completely withdrew absolutely all of his massive, highly necessary financial funding entirely. Despite his desperately passionate, highly impassioned personal written pleas, Tesla was completely, entirely abandoned by all of his wealthy investors. The grand, deeply beautiful tower was tragically, heartbreakingly left entirely unfinished, a totally silent monument to an impossible, beautiful dream. Without the incredibly crucial, completely necessary means to effectively power his grand, deeply sweeping global vision, everything simply stopped. The great, totally brilliant inventor gently, quietly retreated to the deeply lonely, quiet corners of the massive, bustling city. But his brilliant, completely unstoppable mind was still spinning endlessly, completely filled with unseen, totally beautiful, invisible forces. The majestic, deeply tragic, and utterly heartbreaking Wardenclyffe Tower stood completely silently for many long, deeply lonely years. It stood like a giant, totally forgotten skeleton against the beautiful, vast, and endless blue Long Island sky. But in the terrible, deeply painful year of 1917, the absolute final, completely devastating blow was mercilessly struck. The United States government officially, coldly ordered the beautiful, historic Wardenclyffe Tower to be completely, entirely demolished. It was to be totally ripped apart, simply for incredibly cheap, utterly worthless scrap metal to help fund the war effort. The completely painful, entirely tragic intent was to mercilessly liquidate the fine materials to simply pay Tesla's deeply massive debts. The muffled, heavy, and completely tragic thud of crude dynamite, bringing down the beautiful wooden beams of Wardenclyffe, echoed forever. It was the deeply profound, completely agonizing sound of an incredibly beautiful, entirely peaceful, global future being violently, totally destroyed. The great, deeply proud, and incredibly brilliant inventor lived the entire rest of his incredibly long life completely alone. He lived entirely in a deeply lonely, highly transient series of very expensive, grand New York hotels. He drifted entirely quietly through the incredibly opulent, beautiful halls of the Grand Waldorf Astoria and the magnificent St. Regis. As the incredibly long, deeply lonely years slowly passed, he became increasingly, deeply eccentric and profoundly, totally isolated from the world. He slowly, completely developed a severe, incredibly restrictive, and totally paralyzing germophobia that completely, entirely dictated his quiet daily routines. He absolutely refused to touch completely bare human hands, or touch absolutely anything that seemed entirely, slightly unclean. He also completely developed a deeply strange, profoundly intense obsession with the magical, highly mathematical number 3. He would completely insist on walking entirely around a whole city block exactly 3 times before finally entering any building. He quietly, entirely dined, absolutely alone, in the grand, beautifully decorated, and highly crowded hotel restaurants. He strictly, completely required exactly 18 totally clean napkins to meticulously, endlessly clean his polished silverware before ever eating. The crisp, incredibly clean, and perfectly precise fold of white linen napkins stacked neatly on a quiet dining table brought comfort. His primary, absolute, most deeply cherished companionship slowly, completely became the simple, beautiful, and completely forgotten pigeons of the massive city. He faithfully, deeply, lovingly fed them absolutely every single day in the quiet, green, and completely peaceful spaces of Bryant Park. Sometimes he simply, completely opened his high, lonely hotel window, allowing the gentle, beautiful birds to walk freely into his room. The soft, incredibly gentle, and deeply peaceful cooing of pigeons gathering peacefully on a cold stone windowsill was his favorite music. He completely spent many thousands of dollars, desperately, lovingly, caring for sick, completely broken, and terribly injured birds. He famously, beautifully, developed a deep, incredibly profound, and entirely pure affection for one specific, beautifully pure white dove. He confidently claimed this beautiful, delicate bird entirely possessed a deeply mystical, completely undeniable light in its pure, gentle eyes. He loved this completely simple, entirely pure creature more than he had ever loved any mortal human being. In his deeply lonely, entirely quiet, and profoundly peaceful twilight years, his vast mind still furiously, completely, endlessly invented. He confidently, boldly claimed to have completely, entirely invented a massive, highly dangerous, and totally devastating death ray. He called this incredibly terrifying, completely invisible invention his massive Teleforce weapon. He firmly, entirely believed this terrifying, totally supreme invention could easily and permanently, completely end absolutely all violent wars on Earth. He thought it would completely create an absolutely impenetrable, totally invisible wall of pure energy around any peaceful country. But behind the quiet, entirely unseen scenes, his old, deeply loyal, and completely grateful friends at Westinghouse Electric remembered him. They entirely, quietly, completely, secretly paid his deeply massive, totally unaffordable hotel rent every single lonely month. They firmly, entirely ensured he lived completely comfortably in the high, quiet towers of the New Yorker hotel during his final years. The slow, deeply peaceful drift of beautiful dust motes suspended softly in a warm beam of afternoon sunlight marked the passing time. On the incredibly quiet, bitterly freezing winter day of January 7, 1943, his grand, completely incredible journey ended. At the very old, incredibly weary, and entirely exhausted age of 86, Nikola Tesla completely, entirely passed away. He died entirely quietly, completely alone in his sleep, in his lonely bed, in room 3327. It was a completely peaceful, totally unhurried, and deeply gentle fade to black in the deep stillness of a lonely winter night. Soon after his deeply quiet, entirely peaceful passing, his highly secret, completely unpatented, and totally priceless papers were instantly seized. The deeply secretive United States Office of Alien Property completely, immediately confiscated absolutely all of his mysterious, highly complex written notes. This quiet, totally sudden, and completely aggressive government confiscation only deeply added to the incredible, totally profound mystique of his knowledge. It completely sealed the incredible, totally beautiful legend of the brilliant, deeply misunderstood wizard of the modern industrial age. And so, the brilliant, restless mind of Nikola Tesla finally found its peace. He had touched the future, drawing forth the invisible energy that would bind the world together, even as he slipped away into the quiet shadows of history. The buzzing generators and crackling towers of his imagination finally settled into a deep, serene silence. If you found comfort in this story, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath, and simply rest. You can drift off to sleep now, or let the soothing reflections of our epilogue carry you even deeper into relaxation. Good night. Nikola Tesla fundamentally believed that everything in the universe was defined by vibration. He famously stated that to find the secrets of the universe, one must think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. This was not merely a poetic thought, it was the absolute core of his scientific reality. He saw the world not as solid matter, but as an endless dance of oscillating waves. Everything around us is singing a silent song. He understood early on that every physical object possesses a natural resonant frequency. Think of the hypnotic, rhythmic swinging of a heavy brass pendulum cutting through the air. It moves back and forth with a precise, unyielding tempo. If you match that tempo, you can add energy to the swing. This simple concept of matching rhythms would become the foundation of his greatest inventions. It was a secret hidden in plain sight. His mechanical oscillator proved how powerful this hidden rhythm could be. He demonstrated that tiny, rhythmic taps could build massive, destructive energy over time. By simply matching the natural frequency of a steel beam, a small, pocket-sized device could shake an entire building. It was a profound realization about the hidden forces in our world. Small, consistent actions can create monumental waves. And so, his vision expanded downward into the very soil. He viewed the earth not as a sphere of dead rock and inert dust. Instead, he saw it as a massive, vibrating crystal, ringing with endless energy. Picture the gentle, outward ripples on the surface of a still pond, disturbed by a single drop. He believed the planet itself rippled with electrical waves in exactly the same way. The ground beneath our feet was alive with continuous, invisible motion. But his vision did not stop at the surface of the earth. He looked upward into the sky and theorized the existence of the ionosphere. This was a conductive layer of the atmosphere high above the clouds. He imagined this layer decades before it was formally discovered by other scientists. To him, the sky was a reflective dome of electrical potential. It was a crucial part of a giant planetary machine. His grand concept of wireless power relied entirely on this deep understanding. He wanted to find the exact harmonic resonance of the planet itself. Imagine the deep, continuous hum of a tuning fork resonating softly against wood. He wanted to strike the earth like a tuning fork and make it hum with electricity. If he could find the right frequency, power could be drawn anywhere on the globe without wires. This belief in invisible waves extended even to the human mind. He deeply believed that human thoughts and emotions were forms of resonant energy. When you feel a deep calmness, you are simply tuning into a slower, peaceful frequency. The mind was just another instrument capable of broadcasting and receiving vibrations. This idea bridged the gap between hard science and deep philosophy. We are all vibrating at our own unique pace. In fact, modern physics echoes many of his early intuitions about vibration. Today, string theory and quantum mechanics suggest that matter is ultimately composed of vibrating strings of energy. What he felt intuitively in the 19th century is now being mapped by computers. He saw the mathematical poetry of the universe long before we had the tools to prove it. He was a man listening to a song no one else could hear. Even his most practical inventions were born from this abstract symphony. His alternating current motors operate entirely on the principle of synchronized magnetic waves. Picture the slow, breathing expansion and contraction of an invisible magnetic field. This rhythmic breathing pushes and pulls the metal components inside the motor. The motor does not just turn mechanically. It dances to the invisible frequency of the alternating current. Because of this, he rarely took traditional credit for his brightest ideas. He viewed himself merely as a receiver, tuning into the knowledge of the universe. He might feel the soft, warm vibration through the floorboards of an old wooden house and know the world was speaking to him. His brain was the antenna, and the universe was the broadcaster. He simply had to listen closely enough to hear the transmission in the quiet of the night. This deep understanding of invisible vibrations naturally leads us to reconsider the man behind the legends. Popular culture often reduces him to a tragic archetype holding a glowing bulb in the dark. He is frequently portrayed as the quintessential mad scientist surrounded by sparking coils. But this dramatic image obscures the true nature of his brilliant mind. The real man was far more complex and far more grounded than the myths suggest. In reality, he was an intensely disciplined ascetic who valued order above all things. He maintained immaculate hygiene and always wore perfectly tailored clothes. Consider the crisp, flawless crease of a freshly pressed suit in the late afternoon light. This was how he presented himself to the world every single day. His mind may have wandered the cosmos, but his physical presence was sharply defined and meticulously manicured. During his prime years in New York, he was a creature of high society. He was not a hermit hiding in a dark laboratory. He was close friends with renowned poets, famous writers, and passionate conservationists. He attended elegant dinners and captivated guests with his charm and intellect. He navigated the glittering world of the Gilded Age with the same grace he applied to his engineering. The madness so often attributed to his later years was deeply misunderstood. It was likely untreated obsessive-compulsive disorder, a condition poorly understood at the time. Picture the meticulous, slow washing of hands in a quiet porcelain basin. This repetitive need for cleanliness was not a sign of a broken mind. It was a desperate attempt to maintain order in a brain overwhelmed by a constant flood of massive ideas. Furthermore, he possessed a profound aesthetic sense that guided all his work. He firmly believed that true engineering was inherently beautiful and elegant. A machine had to function perfectly, but it also had to look harmonious. He saw no division between the art of design and the science of electricity. To him, a well-crafted motor was a masterpiece of sculpture. Despite the rumors, he never sought destruction with his most terrifying concepts. His infamous death ray was conceptualized strictly as a defensive shield to end war forever. Imagine the soft scratch of a fountain pen drafting a philosophical essay on world peace. He believed that if every nation had an impenetrable shield, invasion would become impossible. His ultimate weapon was designed to make all weapons obsolete. He cared deeply about the ethical implications of his technology on human progress. He was not interested in creating novelties for simple amusement or corporate greed. He wanted to lift the burden of physical labor from the shoulders of humanity. He spent long hours contemplating how his inventions would shape the future of society. He felt a heavy responsibility for the power he was unleashing upon the world. His legendary isolation in later life was not born of a hatred for humanity. It was born from a singular, overwhelming devotion to his work. Listen to the steady, measured ticking of a pocket watch in a silent room. He valued every second of his time and dedicated it entirely to his research. He withdrew from the world only because the world was a distraction from his monumental tasks. He viewed marriage and physical romance as beautiful things for other people. For himself, he believed they were distractions that would cloud his mental laboratory. He felt that the intense emotional demands of a relationship would drain his creative energy. He chose to remain alone so his mind could remain entirely focused on his visions. His true and only love was the pursuit of discovery. His ultimate goal was always the elevation of the human condition through free energy. He wanted to pull power from the very air and give it freely to every person on earth. Imagine a gentle, reflective gaze directed out a rain-streaked window at the sleeping city. He dreamed of a world where poverty and suffering were erased by unlimited, accessible power. Beneath the misunderstood persona lay a foundation of concrete, elegant inventions that quietly run our lives. While some blueprints remained on paper, his most profound inventions are ones we navigate every single day. It is a meditative experience to explore his lesser-known creations and their lingering presence. He was a wildly prolific inventor who held nearly 300 patents worldwide during his lifetime. These patents covered an astonishing range of technologies and concepts. Many of them were so advanced that they are only now being fully understood. For instance, he invented the first completely bladeless turbine engine. Instead of using mechanical pushing, it used the fluid cohesion of air or steam. Picture the smooth, frictionless spinning of metal discs suspended in a bath of oil. The fluid gently dragged the discs along, spinning them at incredible, silent speeds. It was a masterpiece of elegant fluid dynamics that defied traditional engineering rules. He also patented the first vertical takeoff and landing flying machine concept. Decades before modern helicopters or jets, he envisioned an aircraft that could rise straight up into the sky. He wanted to combine the convenience of a helicopter with the speed of an airplane. His drawings show a compact, brilliant machine designed to revolutionize personal travel. He was always looking upward, dreaming of a world in flight. Beyond the clouds, he developed early concepts for radar decades before it was used in World War II. He realized that high-frequency radio waves would bounce off metal objects like ships or submarines. By timing the return of the wave, one could calculate the exact distance of the object. He offered this idea to the Navy, but they could not see its potential at the time. His mind was simply too far ahead of the military establishment. His pioneering work on remote control laid the absolute foundation for modern drones and robotics. He demonstrated a wireless, remote-controlled boat to an astonished crowd in New York. The subtle click of a mechanical valve shifting smoothly in the dark hull of the boat changed history. The crowd thought it was magic or telepathy, but it was just the first step toward a world of automated machines. He designed intricate fluidic logic valves, which were a mechanical precursor to modern transistors. These valves could direct the flow of air or liquid without any moving parts. It was a way to perform logical operations using fluid instead of electricity. This concept is still used today in extreme environments where electronic circuits would melt or fail. His ingenuity knew absolutely no bounds. He explored the therapeutic uses of high-frequency currents on the human body. This medical practice is known as diathermy and is still used by physical therapists today. He discovered that certain frequencies could gently heat deep muscle tissues and promote rapid healing. He frequently treated himself with these currents to relieve stress and exhaustion. He saw electricity as a force for healing, not just for powering machines. He also designed highly efficient ozone generators to purify water and the air we breathe. Recall the faint, clean smell of ozone lingering right after a sudden summer rainstorm. He wanted to capture that cleansing power and use it to sanitize hospitals and homes. He recognized the vital importance of clean air and water for public health long before it was a global concern. Sadly, many of his brilliant patents were allowed to expire due to his complete lack of funds. He was a terrible businessman who poured all his money back into his endless experiments. Picture the intricate, delicate lines of a patent drawing aged to a soft yellow hue in a dusty drawer. These expired patents became free knowledge for the world to take and use. He lost his wealth, but humanity gained his genius. And yet, thousands of pages of his unpatented ideas remain subjects of intense study and speculation today. Imagine the slow turning of a thick, dusty page in a quiet, climate-controlled archive. Scholars still pore over his handwritten notes, searching for lost secrets and forgotten concepts. His mind was a boundless ocean of ideas, and we have only mapped the very shores. While some blueprints remained on paper, his most profound invention is one we navigate every single day. His vision of an interconnected, vibrating world accurately predicted the modern electrical grid and the wireless internet. Every single time a switch is flipped today, alternating current flows based on his exact principles. We are surrounded by his legacy in every room, on every street, and in every city. The power grid itself is a massive, continent-spanning machine operating at his precise 60 Hz standard. It is a living, humming entity that breathes energy into our modern civilization. Listen to the deep, comforting hum of a refrigerator vibrating quietly in the kitchen at midnight. That gentle sound is the heartbeat of his alternating current system, keeping your food safe and cold. He designed the pulse of the modern world. In 1926, he incredibly predicted the modern smartphone with shocking accuracy. He described a pocket-sized device that would allow people to hear and see each other across the globe. He said the Earth would be converted into a huge brain capable of instantaneous communication. Feel the soft, warm glow of a smartphone screen illuminating a face in the dark. You are holding his century-old prophecy in the palm of your hand. He envisioned a world wireless system that would transmit stock quotes, beautiful music, and vivid images instantly. He wanted to build giant towers that would broadcast this information to every corner of the Earth. He saw a future where knowledge was free and accessible to every single person, regardless of borders. His dream of universal connectivity is the exact blueprint of our modern internet. His concept of the Earth as a resonant medium perfectly mirrors our modern web of satellite communications. We bounce invisible signals off machines in the sky to talk to people on the other side of the planet. Picture the silent, invisible waves of radio washing gently through the walls of your room right now. You cannot see them, but they are carrying 1,000 voices through the quiet night air. The radio you listen to operates on tuning principles he fiercely litigated to prove were his own. Although others took the credit and the wealth, the fundamental circuits were born in his mind. He understood how to isolate a single invisible wave from a chaotic sea of frequencies. He gave us the ability to tune into our favorite music on a lonely midnight drive. The bright neon signs glowing in modern cities operate on the gas discharge principles he pioneered in his lab. He was the first to bend glass tubes and fill them with gas to create glowing letters. Picture the gentle, rhythmic pulsing of a faraway neon sign cutting through a thick coastal fog. That colorful light is a direct continuation of his early experiments with luminous tubes. He painted the night with electricity. Even the spark plugs, hidden deep inside internal combustion engines, owe their existence to his high-voltage coils. The rhythmic sparking that powers a car down the highway is a miniature version of his lightning experiments. The subtle, microscopic flow of electrons races seamlessly through copper veins inside the engine block. His work touches almost every single piece of modern technology we rely upon. Furthermore, he foresaw the desperate need for renewable energy long before climate change was a known threat. He advocated for harnessing the power of the sun and the heat of the earth to save our coal reserves. He believed it was a crime against future generations to burn finite resources when infinite energy surrounded us. His environmental foresight was just as sharp as his electrical engineering. We truly live inside the very machine he hallucinated in the 19th century. Every wire, every glowing screen, and every humming motor is a piece of his vast, sprawling dream. It is a world built by a solitary dreamer for a humanity he hoped would one day wake up to its true potential. We are the inheritors of his quiet, relentless imagination. This brings us to a final philosophical thought on the power of the mind and the beauty of daydreaming. This is a thought that bridges his incredible life to your own resting mind in this very moment. His greatest tool was never made of copper, steel, or glass. It was the limitless, expansive canvas of his own boundless imagination. Before he built a machine, he built it perfectly in the quiet of his mind. He believed deeply that the human brain was a highly sensitive receiver of cosmic intelligence. He did not think his ideas came from nowhere. He spent hours in quiet meditation, allowing complex ideas to form slowly, without forcing them. Think of the slow, deep expansion of the chest during a final, relaxing breath before sleep. He used that exact same relaxation to open the doors of his perception. He proved that the boundary between the internal mind and external reality is highly permeable. What exists only as a thought today can become a solid, humming machine tomorrow. Feel the vast, empty space of your mind when you close your eyes in a quiet, dark room. That empty space is exactly where the modern world was first conceived and designed. It is a place of infinite, quiet power. His life shows that what is initially dismissed as a wild hallucination can become tomorrow's undeniable truth. People called him foolish for believing he could send power through the air or light up the night safely. But he trusted his inner vision more than he trusted the doubts of the outside world. He knew that the mind could see further than the eyes. He found deep, sustaining comfort in his absolute solitude. He used the profound quiet to hear the subtle, hidden frequencies of the natural world. Imagine a gentle, drifting sensation, like floating weightlessly on a calm, dark, and endless sea. He floated in that sea of ideas, far away from the noise and rush of the crowded city. In the silence, he found the secrets of the universe. He died financially poor in a quiet hotel room, but he left humanity an inheritance of incalculable wealth. He gave us the light to read by, the motors to build with, and the invisible web that connects us all. Notice the feeling of weightlessness as your body sinks entirely into a soft, warm mattress. You are resting in a world made infinitely more comfortable by his lifelong, tireless labor. His legacy is a beautiful testament to the power of holding onto a grand vision, even in the dark. Even when the world did not understand him, he kept working, kept dreaming, and kept building. He believed in the ultimate, beautiful unity of mankind through technology and shared, boundless energy. He wanted us to be connected, not just by wires, but by a shared, harmonious frequency. To remember him is to remember the quiet, profound, and world-changing power of a simple daydream. As you drift closer to sleep, allow your own thoughts to untangle and softly fade away. Picture the soft fading of thoughts, replaced by a warm, enveloping, and perfect silence. Your mind, just like his, is a quiet place of endless potential and deep, restorative peace. As we reflect on the luminous mind of Nikola Tesla, we are reminded that the greatest forces in our universe are entirely invisible. Gravity, magnetism, and love cannot be seen, they can only be felt. And like the alternating currents that quietly hum through the walls around you, bringing light and warmth to the night, The legacy of this solitary dreamer continues to wash over us all. Allow these invisible waves of history to carry you now. The story has ended, but the resonance remains. Let your mind drift safely in the quiet dark. Metadata. Sections. Part 4. Subchapter 4.1. Subchapter 4.2. Subchapter 4.3. Subchapter 4.4. Subchapter 4.5. Epilogue. Concluding words. Word count. 2,963 words. MP script. By the sleeping Scribe 10 writer.